The snow fell heavy that night, swallowing the little town in silence. A thick white blanket erased the world, leaving only the glow of a few lonely streetlights flickering through the storm. Roads disappeared beneath drifts, cars lay abandoned, and the wind howled through empty streets like restless ghosts. At the very edge of town, tucked behind a crooked picket fence, stood a small wooden house. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, defying the cold. Inside, a gentle old woman named Margaret sat by her fire, knitting quietly. Her gray hair was pinned neatly back, her wrinkled hands steady despite the storm raging beyond her walls. Margaret had seen many winters in that house, but this one felt different, lonelier. Her husband had been gone for years, her children scattered across distant cities, and the nights often stretched longer than the days. That evening, as the blizzard roared louder, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer that anyone lost in the cold might find warmth, shelter, and a touch of kindness. She had no idea how quickly that prayer was about to be answered, or how that night would change her life forever. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of compassion, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, where stories like this remind us that goodness still lives in the world. The knock came, suddenly but sharp and loud, rattling the old wooden door so hard that Margaret nearly dropped her knitting. Her heart raced. At her age, unexpected visitors were rare, especially in the middle of a blizzard. Pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders, she shuffled to the door. When she opened it, she gasped. Standing in the swirling snow were 15 men, broad-shouldered and leather-clad. Their jackets bore the unmistakable emblem, Hell's Angels. Their beards were crusted with ice, their faces red from the bitter wind, their boots half buried in the snow. Behind them, their motorcycles leaned together like frozen sentinels, their chrome turned to frost. For a moment, Margaret's knees trembled. These were men the world whispered about, the kind people crossed the street to avoid. But then she saw it. Beyond the tattoos, the cold, and the hardened stares, they were shivering. Their lips were blue, their eyes weary, their hands stiff with cold. Whatever their reputation, tonight they were just human beings caught in a deadly storm. Without a second thought, Margaret stepped aside. "Come in," she said softly. "Before you freeze," the bikers hesitated. Most people slammed doors in their faces. Yet here was a frail woman, barely reaching their shoulders, welcoming them without fear or hesitation. One by one they filed in, stamping snow from their boots. The little house seemed to grow smaller with every step they took, filled suddenly with the weight of leather and steel and thawing men. Inside, the quiet living room transformed into a refuge of warmth. Margaret hurried to the kitchen, pulling out whatever she could find. A loaf of bread, some canned soup, a bit of leftover stew. It wasn't much, but she served it with a smile, moving about as if she'd been expecting them all along. The bikers sat awkwardly, massive frames squeezed onto floral couches and wooden chairs. They weren't used to kindness, not like this. Not the kind that saw past who they were and simply saw people in need. As the hours passed, the storm grew fiercer, pounding against the windows like a living beast. Inside, the men told their story, how the blizzard had caught them off guard on the road, how every motel had been full, how their bikes had nearly frozen solid. Without shelter, they wouldn't have made it till morning. Margaret listened quietly, eyes soft, pouring coffee and handing out blankets that smelled faintly of lavender and age. One by one, the tough bikers drifted to sleep, wrapped in quilts, snoring loudly by the fire. Margaret stayed awake, watching them with a strange, tender warmth. She had never had sons, but that night it felt as though she'd been given 15 of them. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside shimmered, a sea of untouched snow glistening like diamonds beneath the pale morning sun. The men stirred, rubbing sleep from their eyes, murmuring their thanks in gruff, humble voices. Margaret made them breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. When they stepped outside, they found their bikes half buried but intact. Their leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, turned to her and said quietly, "Ma'am, we won't forget this. Ever." Margaret smiled, patted his arm, and wished them safe travels. Moments later, the engines roared to life, echoing through the hills as the 15 bikers rode away, leaving her alone again in her little wooden house. She thought that was the end of it. Just a beautiful memory. One night when her home had become a haven for those the world called dangerous. But kindness has a way of coming back. The next morning, as Margaret was feeding the birds in her snowy yard, she heard it, a low rumble, distant at first, like thunder rolling across the hills. Then it grew louder. The ground trembled. The air vibrated. She clutched her shawl and stepped to the fence, her heart pounding. Down the long road she saw them. Motorcycles. Not 15 this time, but hundreds. A line of bikes stretching as far as her eyes could see. Engines rumbled as they filled the street on both sides of her little house, the air thick with the scent of fuel and frost. Neighbors peeked from their windows, nervous and confused. But Margaret just stood there, speechless, tears glistening in her eyes. The tall leader dismounted and walked toward her, holding something in his hand. A bouquet of fresh flowers, impossibly vibrant in the middle of winter. He smiled, a real smile, one filled with gratitude. "We told the brothers what you did," he said. "Word spread. You gave us shelter when no one else would. We don't forget things like that." Behind him, bikers began unloading supplies, bags of groceries, stacks of firewood, boxes of warm clothes, blankets, and tools. Some fixed her fence. Others shoveled her driveway. A few repaired the squeaky porch hinge. For hours they worked, laughing, talking, filling her home with life and warmth once more. Margaret hadn't felt that alive in years. That day, she learned something powerful. Kindness has a ripple effect. What you give freely never disappears. It multiplies, it echoes, and it returns when you least expect it. The Hell's Angels, men the world saw as dangerous, had shown the truest kind of strength: gratitude, loyalty, and heart. As the sun began to set, they lined up their bikes in front of her house. Engines revved in unison, a thunderous salute to the woman who opened her door when the storm could have taken their lives. Margaret stood on her porch, tears glimmering, waving as they rode off one by one. The roar of their engines faded into the snowy valley until silence returned again. But her house no longer felt empty, because somewhere out there, she now had family, family on 2 wheels, bound not by blood, but by kindness. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so we can keep spreading stories that warm the world. And tell us, would you have opened the door that night? Let's talk about the courage it takes to choose kindness, even when the world teaches us to be afraid. Margaret's story is more than a winter tale. It's a reminder that kindness is never wasted. It plants seeds that bloom in unexpected ways. Sometimes, all it takes is a warm fire, a simple meal, and a door left open in the storm, to change not just 15 lives, but hundreds, maybe even more. And in the quiet of her little house that night, as the fire crackled and snow fell softly outside, Margaret smiled, knowing she was never truly alone again.